Take a moment right now before you move on to the next thing. Just pause here for a little while, because if something guided you to these words today, there is a good chance that was not as accidental as it might appear on the surface. You may have been carrying something quietly for a while now, a feeling you could not quite articulate, a question living somewhere beneath your daily thoughts, and somehow you found yourself here. So stay with me. I want you to bring someone to mind right now, a specific person. Let their face come into your thoughts clearly and then simply notice what happens in your body when it does. That warmth that surfaces somewhere in your chest. That bittersweet mix of tenderness and longing and something else that does not have a clean name. That feeling is not confusion dressed up as emotion. It is your heart recognizing something that your mind has not yet fully caught up to. This person did not walk into your life casually. There is something about this connection that feels different from the ones that came before it, something that carries a quality of familiarity that goes beyond the logical explanation of how long you have known each other. And I want you to understand something about what you have been carrying. The weight of loving someone through uncertainty is not a small thing. All of the nights you lay awake with feelings you did not know what to do with. All of the moments you questioned yourself, wondering if you were reading too much into things, if the signs you thought you saw were real or invented, if any of it was worth the continued ache of not knowing. It has all mattered, more than you have been giving it credit for. You have not been foolish. You have not been excessively emotional. You have not been too much of anything. You have been standing inside an experience that has the potential to become something genuinely meaningful, which is precisely why it has felt so difficult to carry. These kinds of connections are not difficult because they are wrong. They are difficult because of where they reach. They do not land on the surface of a person. They go directly into the places we have spent years carefully protecting, the tender, unresolved, quietly aching parts of ourselves that we learned at some point to keep covered. When someone actually reaches those places, the response is rarely simple comfort. More often, it is disorientation. Because the protective habits we built around those vulnerable spaces stop being effective the moment genuine connection shows up, and the dismantling of those habits, necessary as it is, does not feel graceful. It feels like disruption before it feels like freedom. Most people carry an idea that love, when it is real, should feel like arriving somewhere calm, like finally reaching still water after years of struggling against a current that kept pulling you back under. And sometimes it does feel like that eventually. But the connections that actually change us, the ones that go deep enough to rearrange something fundamental in who we are and how we move through the world, those rarely begin in stillness. They begin in turbulence. They shake loose the old coping mechanisms, the emotional distance we kept as armor, the pride we used to avoid being seen, the self-protective habits that kept us safe from hurt, but also kept us from being truly known. Before they bring peace, they create a kind of internal upheaval that can feel, especially in the early stages, like something going wrong rather than something beginning to go right. Consider the person in this dynamic who gives too much, who overextends, who stretches past their own limits to keep the connection alive, who operates from a deep belief that love must be constantly earned through patience and sacrifice and demonstrated worthiness. The arrival of a meaningful connection begins to expose how exhausted that person truly is, not just tired from the specific relationship, but tired from years of operating from the belief that being loved was something they had to consistently prove they deserved. That realization, once it surfaces clearly enough to be acknowledged, is not comfortable, because it asks the question of where that belief came from in the first place. And answering that question honestly requires looking at things that are easier left unexamined. And on the other side of the same dynamic sits someone different but equally wounded in their own specific way. Someone who learned somewhere along the way that getting close to people led to pain, whose nervous system quietly came to associate genuine intimacy with danger rather than safety, not because they made a conscious decision to become emotionally unavailable, but because their system adapted to experiences that taught them closeness was risky. They create distance not because the connection lacks importance to them, but because the feelings that arise within it become too intense, too threatening to their sense of control over their own inner world. From the outside, it looks like one person reaching and the other retreating, like a simple imbalance of investment. But beneath the surface, it is actually two people responding differently to the exact same underlying fear. The fear of being rejected, the fear of being insufficient, the fear of being truly seen and then losing the thing they allowed themselves to want. The person who chases is afraid that love disappears the moment they stop fighting to keep it close. The person who retreats is afraid that closeness will cost them their sense of self. Both of them are operating from pain. Both of them are doing the best they can within the emotional architecture they developed as a way of surviving their particular history. The one who pursues needs to understand that abandoning themselves entirely is not sustainable and not the foundation of anything lasting, that their value is not measured in endurance, that worth is not demonstrated through how much pain a person can absorb in the name of maintaining a connection. There is a difference between being committed to something real and dismantling yourself in order to hold something together that is not yet ready to stand on its own. The one who withdraws carries their own lesson. The distance they create does not deliver the relief they are seeking. More often than not, it produces something they did not anticipate: guilt and an increased awareness of how much they actually feel. Emotional walls keep out pain, but they also prevent the receipt of the very love the person behind them quietly hungers for. Healing is never a clean or linear process. At the beginning, it looks like nothing resembling progress. It looks like confusion and contradiction and emotional overwhelm and long stretches of silence while someone slowly tries to understand themselves with more honesty than they have previously been willing to apply. Real transformation requires a kind of ending before the new thing can begin. Not a physical death, but the dissolution of old identities, old defense systems, old ways of understanding what love is and what it asks of us. Like a caterpillar that literally breaks down into something formless inside the cocoon before it becomes what it was always meant to be, the becoming requires a period that feels like falling apart rather than coming together. This is why certain connections are almost unbearable to navigate. They hold up a mirror, and what gets reflected back is everything we have been working to avoid seeing. The contradictions within us, the ways we simultaneously ache for closeness and recoil from it, the gap between the love we profess to want and the willingness we actually have to become vulnerable enough to receive it. Attachment in its anxious form says, "Please stay, because without you, something inside me remains incomplete." Genuine love, the kind that can actually hold two people through the long and difficult work of a real relationship, eventually says something different. I want to meet you fully, and I am also learning how to remain whole within myself. That shift in orientation changes the entire quality of what becomes possible. But there is one piece of this that tends to get overlooked in most conversations about difficult connections. In every dynamic like this one, there is a turning point, and it almost never arrives in the form of the dramatic conversation or the long-awaited declaration people spend so much time hoping for. It does not come because someone finally says the words you have been needing to hear. It comes from something internal, a quiet decision that only you can make. The decision to stop waiting to be chosen and to begin genuinely and wholeheartedly choosing yourself instead. When that shift happens, not as a performance or a tactic designed to create a particular response, but as an authentic and deeply felt change in where your energy is directed, something moves in the whole dynamic. Not through the mechanics of some spiritual law, but through the simple truth that the energy we bring to any connection changes what that connection is able to hold. When you stop reaching towards someone from a place of fear or desperation, or the need to be completed by their acceptance, you stop becoming something their nervous system instinctively wants to create distance from. They are left, perhaps for the first time, with only what they actually feel about you. Not what they fear, not what they have been avoiding, not the story they have been telling themselves to justify staying at a safe emotional distance. Just what is genuinely there. And what is genuinely there may never have gone anywhere. I want you to trust something that may have been difficult to hold on to during the harder stretches of this. Every single part of the experience you have moved through has carried meaning. None of it has been wasted. I understand that it has sometimes felt that way. There are moments when you look back at all of the love you have offered and wonder where it went. Whether it landed anywhere, whether it reached the person it was intended for, whether any of it was worth the pain it came wrapped in. But love does not simply dissolve. It does not disappear into empty space and leave no trace. Every quiet evening spent carrying feelings that had nowhere to go. Every night you fell asleep with unspoken things still living in your chest. Every moment of genuine care you offered even when it was not clearly received. All of it has shaped something in you that is more real and more significant than you may currently be able to see. The love you have been carrying has deepened you. It has expanded your capacity to hold something that matters. It has stretched the container of who you are in ways that will serve you in the receiving of what is genuinely meant for your life. When you cry because something that feels so right is simultaneously causing so much pain, that is not weakness making itself known. It is not fragility or oversensitivity. It is the sound of a heart that refuses to abandon what it recognizes as significant. It is a form of emotional courage that is actually quite rare, because most people, when uncertainty stretches long enough and the cost climbs high enough, find ways to protect themselves. They build walls. They talk themselves out of caring. They decide that loving this deeply was a mistake and close themselves off before they can be hurt any further. You could have made that choice at any number of points in this journey, and no one would have blamed you for it. It would have been understandable. It would have made complete sense as a self-protective response to the specific difficulty of what you have been navigating. But you did not make that choice. You stayed open when closing would have been so much easier. You remained gentle when becoming hardened was available as the simpler path. In a world that frequently rewards emotional guardedness and treats vulnerability as a liability, your decision to remain open to the full experience of this connection is not a weakness. It is a form of strength that most people never develop because they stop trusting before they ever have the opportunity to discover what trust can build. To love genuinely without keeping a constant mental account of what is being returned is extraordinarily uncommon. Most people love conditionally in the sense that they are always, even if only subconsciously, monitoring the exchange, watching for whether what they give is matched by what comes back, adjusting their investment based on the signals they receive. That kind of love has its own logic, but the love you have been offering, the kind that continues even through confusion, even through inconsistency, even through seasons of silence and uncertainty, is the kind from which lasting and meaningful relationships are eventually built, not because it has no limits, but because it originates from genuine care rather than strategic calculation. To care about someone through genuine confusion, through physical and emotional separation, through stretches of time where nothing feels resolved and no progress seems to be happening, and to do all of that without becoming bitter or resentful toward them or toward the experience, requires something that cannot be manufactured. It cannot be copied or performed convincingly. It comes from a place inside a person that is either there or it is not, and it is there in you. That is not a minor detail about your character. It may actually be one of the most defining things about who you are. And it is precisely that quality, that genuine depth of care, that is orienting you towards something real, not towards something that keeps you permanently suspended in uncertainty. Not toward a connection where you are constantly trying to decode what is being said between the words and what the silence is actually communicating. Not toward a future where you lie awake, replaying interactions, searching for what you missed, wondering what you could have done differently to make things feel more stable. Not toward a love that keeps your nervous system in a perpetual state of low-grade alert, always bracing for the next shift, always preparing for the floor to drop out again. What you are actually moving toward is something that fits. Something that does not ask you to make yourself smaller or quieter or less present in order to maintain it. A connection that feels natural rather than exhausting. A love that allows you to exhale properly for the first time in what might feel like a very long while. A relationship where the question of whether you are enough simply ceases to be a question, not because you finally convinced someone of your worth through sustained effort and demonstration, but because you are sharing your life with someone who never held your worth in question. That possibility is real. But it depends, more than anything else, on what you choose to do now. And I am not going to soften this or make it sound simpler than it is. What you need to do is genuinely and intentionally redirect your attention back toward yourself, not as a technique designed to produce a specific reaction in someone else, not as a way to signal something or prove a point or create enough distance to inspire pursuit. Those approaches are about managing someone else's feelings, and they will exhaust you further. What I am describing is something honest, actually bringing your energy home, redirecting the emotional investment that has been flowing outward and consciously choosing to pour some portion of it back into your own life and your own experience. Ask yourself a question that you may not have sat with honestly in some time. What do you actually need right now? Not what do they need from you. Not what could you do differently to change how things feel between you. Not what would finally create the shift you have been hoping for. What do you need? What would genuinely feel nourishing to you today if you allowed yourself to have it? What parts of your own life have been sitting quietly on the periphery of your attention, while the majority of your focus has been directed at something uncertain and slightly out of reach? Begin filling those spaces. The dreams you set aside because everything felt too unsettled to move toward them. Start moving toward them anyway. The experiences you delayed because your heart was occupied elsewhere. Allow yourself to have them. The friendships that became less central while your emotional energy was absorbed by this one particular situation. Reach back toward some of those people, the parts of yourself that you placed on a kind of internal shelf while you waited for the larger situation to resolve. Take them down and bring them back into your daily life. None of this requires you to stop caring. You do not have to convince yourself that what you feel is less real than it is, or that what has existed in this connection carries no genuine meaning. That is not what this is about. This is about expanding back out, making sure your entire life is not organized around one person and one possible outcome. Remembering that you are a full and complete human being whose life contains purpose and movement and meaning, regardless of what is happening in any single relationship. That is not a way of giving up on something. It is a way of remembering who you are beyond it. When you actually begin doing this, something changes. Not dramatically and not immediately. It is a quiet shift, and most people do not even recognize it happening until it has already been underway for some time. You stop feeling like someone waiting for a sentence to be completed by someone else. You stop experiencing your life as though it is suspended in a holding pattern, waiting for one particular situation to resolve before real living can resume. You begin to feel grounded in your own existence rather than tethered to someone else's uncertainty. And that groundedness changes something about the quality of your presence in a way that is noticeable even when you are not trying to make it so. There is something unmistakable about a person who has genuinely come home to themselves. It carries its own quiet magnetism, the kind that cannot be performed and does not need to be. Now, something important about the other person in this dynamic. They are not the villain in your story, even if there have been moments when the hurt made it tempting to frame them that way. Moments when the silence or the inconsistency or the emotional distance made it easier to place them in that role, to divide things cleanly into someone who was doing things right and someone who was not. But people are almost never that simple, and they are not that either. What you have been experiencing as emotional distance or withholding is usually something considerably more complex and considerably more painful for them than it appears from the outside. Most people who struggle with closeness are not cold or indifferent or incapable of genuine feeling. They learned, long before you entered their life, that love was a risky undertaking. Somewhere in their past, intimacy became associated with pain or loss or the kind of disappointment that leaves marks. Love began to feel expensive in ways they were not sure they could afford. They did not choose that framework consciously. No one sits down and deliberately decides to build their entire emotional life around the premise that closeness is dangerous. It becomes part of the architecture of a person through experiences that happened before they had the language or the perspective to understand what was being installed, and it shapes how they protect themselves from that point forward. So the withdrawal, the inconsistency, the moments of inexplicable distance, these are not statements about your value. They are a map of someone else's unresolved history showing up in the present. They think about you in the quiet spaces. In the moments between distractions when there is no noise left to fill the gap, you are there. They notice your absence even during the stretches when they themselves created the distance. There is something happening inside them with respect to you that does not simply stop existing because there is less contact, because what they feel about you is not located in the practical logistics of how often you are in communication. It lives somewhere deeper than that. But the work of resolving whatever is unfinished inside them is not work that you can do for them. No matter how clearly you see what they need, no matter how much love you have available to offer, no matter how committed you are to the idea that your presence and your patience could be the thing that finally allows them to open. Their healing belongs to them. It can only happen through their own willingness to look at themselves honestly and to make different choices than the ones their fear has been steering them toward. The most powerful thing you have access to is the choice not to allow their unresolved internal landscape to become evidence of something lacking in you. Their struggle is theirs. Your worth remains entirely intact regardless of where they currently are in their own process. Carry yourself with enough dignity and genuine self-respect that when they finally move through whatever has been holding them back, what they encounter on the other side is you at your best, not worn down by years of waiting, not hollowed out by the sustained effort of loving someone who was not yet ready to meet you fully, not still searching for the external validation you should have been giving yourself all along. Instead, someone standing steadily in their own light, someone whose foundation is intact, someone who is genuinely ready for what comes next because they spent the difficult middle chapters of this story choosing growth over obsession and self-respect over self-erasure. Close your eyes for a moment and allow yourself to imagine something. Picture a morning that may not be as far away as it sometimes feels. You wake up, and the first thing you notice is that the weight you have been carrying is gone. That particular heaviness that settled somewhere in your chest so gradually that you almost stopped noticing it was there. The constant, low-level pressure of something unresolved living just beneath the surface of your daily experience. It is not there. Not because you stopped caring, and not because you pushed the feelings away through force of will. The weight is gone because the love has finally found a place to land. Because what was unresolved has found its resolution. Because what always seemed to live somewhere in the future has become simply part of the present. Imagine looking at this person and actually seeing them clearly, not searching their expression for signs of what they are holding back, not watching for the moment when they will pull away again. Instead, seeing someone who has arrived fully, someone whose eyes do not carry the familiar flicker of internal conflict. Someone who is not managing their feelings from a careful distance or keeping a portion of themselves in reserve. Someone who has made a complete and unguarded choice and is entirely at peace with it. Not dramatic peace, not the relief of a crisis resolved, just the quiet, settled quality of someone who has come home to themselves and found you there and chosen you without reservation. Imagine what it would feel like to love someone without that love visiting you in the middle of the night as a source of anxiety. A love that does not keep you awake replaying conversations for hidden meanings. A love that does not have your nervous system constantly prepared for the next wave of uncertainty. Where you are not watching for signals and not bracing for disappointment and not quietly rehearsing how you will manage the next painful shift. A love where the question of whether you are enough has simply ceased to arise, not because you exhausted yourself proving it, but because it was never in question. That is not a wishful fantasy, constructed to make the difficult present more bearable. It is the natural arrival point of two people who chose their own healing, who stopped showing up to a relationship carrying unexamined wounds and expecting the other person to absorb and repair the damage, who took genuine responsibility for their own growth and their own emotional patterns and their own capacity for honest self-examination. When two people who have each done that work finally come together, what they are able to build is real in a way that connection built on unprocessed need simply cannot be. That is what is quietly being constructed inside all of this. Within the uncertainty and the waiting and the moments that feel like they are going nowhere, every time you choose to take care of yourself rather than dissolving into fear about the relationship, you are laying down another piece of something that will hold. Every time you choose peace over panic, every time you choose your own dignity over the desperate impulse to chase reassurance, every time you choose to grow rather than to obsess, you are strengthening the foundation of the thing that is coming. The middle of any real story is always the hardest stretch. It is where progress is least visible, where the distance between where you are and where you are going feels the most uncertain and the most discouraging, where people most often decide to stop, not because the destination was never real, but because the middle asked more of them than they expected, and they could not find enough evidence that continuing forward was worth it. Do not let the difficulty of where you are right now persuade you that what is ahead does not exist. It does exist, and the person doing the quiet, unglamorous work of choosing themselves and growing through the uncertainty of this chapter is precisely the person who will be ready for it when it arrives.